In this lecture, we are going to talk about auto layout. So let's create a single view application. I'm going to call this auto layout, and let's create it. So what auto layout means? For example, if we have one application that we can take as an example, our planetarium that we just created. Our view here in our storyboard says that the view as iPhone 8. So it means that current view we see how on the iPhone 8 the application will look like. But if we run the application on any other size device, for example an iPhone 10 or an iPhone SE or even an even an iPad, it's going to have different view size. So our views that we have positioned around the screen is going to be completely different. So for example, let's look at the sample here. We have iPhone 8 here, and I'm going to drag out one button, and I'm going to position it in the top left corner and call this my button 1, and I'm using blue guidelines here. Then let's copy it and paste it at the bottom. I'm using Command C and Command V in order to copy and paste. And let's call this my button 2. I'm not using any auto layout constraints or whatsoever. Also, let's grab, for example, a label. And I'm going to position my label here in the middle using my blue guidelines. So if I run my application now, and I'm going to choose an iPhone 8, and let's try it. So you see that my button here is on the top, as we have on our storyboard. My label is in the middle, and my button 2 is at the bottom, same as we have on our storyboard, which is perfect. But what if I will run this on an iPhone 10? So we change our simulator to iPhone 10, and let's run the same. I will keep this open here so you can see the difference. So here my iPhone 10 is running, and as you can see my button 1 is almost touching the time there. My label is nowhere close to the middle, and my button 2, instead of being at the bottom, is somewhere in the bottom area of the screen, but it's not at the bottom. So our view is different on two different devices, and if I run the application on an iPhone SE, which is much smaller 4-inch screen, 4-inch screen, you will not even see the button 2 here, because it will just be out of our viewing area. So the same application is different on each device. But as a developers, when we are building and designing something, we want it to be consistent throughout our different devices and different screen sizes. So for this, Apple has the auto layout. So what auto layout is, we set some kind of constraints that where we want specific user UI element to be, and then it will calculate automatically based on the screen size and position our buttons where we initially want them to be. For example, let's start from our button, which is my button 1. And if you select the view here, there are a few different ways of adding auto constraints. I'm going to show you all, and I'm going to show you the easiest one. So when you select a view, you have an option to control and drag to the super view, which is our big view that we are inside, and then you can have here some kind of constraints. So you can say center horizontally in safe area, or trailing space. The trailing space is the left side, of our screen, you can see when I bring it close, it uses the blue guideline. This is the left side, it's trailing space. If I move this to the right side and then I drag to my view, you will see that instead of trailing space, it says leading space. So we don't have like left border or right border, and the reason is because when you change a language, like Arabic for example, they always read from right to left instead of left to right. So that's why Apple calls them leading and trailing spaces. So also, if you have paid attention, when you control and drag, if I drag to bottom direction, I see here different patterns like bottom space or center horizontal or center vertically. If I control drag up, it will say top space, so we can add a top margin here, and center horizontal and vertical is always there. So if I drag on right or left, I get like leading space, and if I drag to right, I will have trailing space. So this way, if I, for example, if I drag on top, or if I drag diagonally here, I will see the leading and top, because we have the leading area and top area. If I set top space, you will see that now I have some kind of blue line there, and if I go to my measurements, under constraints, you will see that I have a constraint here. It says align to top safe area. So it means that my button is touching top safe area. If I take and drag my button down now, you will see that there is a dotted space here, which means that on the runtime, my button will be right here and not where I see it. And then I have plus 27. The meaning of this is that my button's position will be 27 points up. So if I take an arrow while I have selected my view here and make one up, it will say plus 26. So if I move 26 points up, my button will be in the place where my constraints think it should be. And you also can see that right now we have orange constraints here. What it means that our controller here doesn't know where exactly this button will be. So the dotted space, dotted line here shows that on the runtime our button will be there, but there is no fixed place for it. And when we click on this label, it doesn't have any constraints and it doesn't try to even guess where it should be. So let's move our view back to the place. And you see now my lines here are red. And if I open the side panel here, I have a red arrow. This is kind of errors inside our storyboard. And if I click on the error, it asks me to add missing constraints here. This is very tricky. Sometimes Xcode can help you to add missing constraints, but I really strongly encourage you not to do this because it will mess your code, your user interface even more when you let the Xcode to decide the constraints. When it's a simple case like this button here, we are using blue guidelines top and right, and if I click on add missing constraints, let's see what type of constraints it will add. The top we already had, and then it added a trailing space. So right now, our button, you see that we have all blue guidelines. It means that on the runtime, this button knows where it's going to be. That's why we have blue guidelines. The red means that it doesn't know where it's going to be, and orange dotted line, it means that it will not be where you currently see, and the dotted lines show where it's going to be on the runtime. So if we go back, for example, my label here is in the middle of my view, and you can understand it because I'm using the blue guidelines. It's exactly in the middle. So if you check down here, we have 4 buttons, and the 2 of them, the right 2, are for constraints. This yellow triangle, auto layout issues, you can hit on it and then you can ask to add missing constraints. So this way Xcode decides automatically where you want to do the constraints. So if I click on this now, because I'm positioning my label exactly in the center using the blue guidelines, Xcode automatically thinks that we want our view to be in the middle, and it positions two constraints here if you want to check. It says align leading safe area, which is actually, you see the two lines here. One of them is aligning on x-axis, one of them aligning on the y-axis, and also it sets a constraint to be and 166 points from the left side of the screen. So even though we have set it to be like vertically in the middle, it has another constraint that it says that no, it should be 166 points right from our left border. So it's going to ignore one of the constraints, so it's not going to set in the middle, but it's going to set it to 166 points on the right side from the wall. So trusting our Xcode to set a constraint was a bad idea. And also if you zoom in, you will see that we have dotted guidelines here. It means that it's not properly set also. And the problem here is this view doesn't know how wide it should be. So yeah, it understands that it should be some points from the left border or it should be in the middle, but it doesn't understand how wide it should be. So if I say Command Z to undo my constraints, and let's open the panel again, the triangle one. It also has, this is selected view, and the bottom area here after the line is all views in view controller. So if I choose one of these, this applies only to the view that I have selected. But if I choose something at the bottom, it will apply every view that is in my current view. For example, now my button and my label have no constraints. So if I go here and say add missing constraints, and I select it here, you see that it has added two constraints. My label has three constraints now, middle and on the right side. And this view already had constraints, so it didn't add any more. So right now our buttons are okay because they are relatively easy to add constraints when you are in the corners, but in the middle we have an issue. So I'm going to again make Ctrl Z, and let's say you are adding some type of constraints and you want to remove all of them and add them again from the beginning. You can select a specific view and say clear constraints.